Namaste and welcome to the Bharat Vartha podcast. After a long COVID break, real election politics returned to India. We had 30 by-elections for assembly seats and 3 for Lok Sabha seats. These elections happened on 30th October and the results were announced on 2nd November. To run through some of these elections and really understand the significance of this, I have Rohit Jayaraman, our political expert here, to look at the numbers and analyze and offer insights and perspectives on this. Hey Rohit, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me. Always great to be on the podcast.
Right. So Rohit, before we get into some of the state-specific numbers, right, what is your overall view of the by-polls? What do the numbers tell you?
So that's a very good question, right? In the sense that, as you mentioned in your mention when you started this is the first real set of by-polls that's happened in India since the whole West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Assam, Kerala elections that happened in April, right? And that was followed by the second wave. There was a lot of political chaos. There was it was not a great time for the central government, right? I mean, the prime minister's image suffered and other kinds of things happened. Then then the vaccination campaign took place. And after that, you had the whole thing about fuel prices, right? Because fuel prices started surging in large parts of the country over September, October, etc. And while there were some small elections that happened in Bengal and Orissa, I think around sometime in October, these were the real big set of by-polls. And to that extent, this was supposed to at least offer an idea of, how people across the country were reacting to some of these issues. You start with the entire COVID second wave, and then the vaccination, and now generally numbers are down and normal life has returned to most parts of India. On top of that, you had the whole fuel crisis, the fuel price, hikes. So these kind of things, it was just an opportunity for a lot of us political nerds to at least see how things were, especially because, you have 5 assembly elections coming up in February, including, of course, the all important state of UP. So this was obviously, while it was not meant to be, give a definitive account of how things are. It was meant to broadly give some signals, at least at a very macro level, right, on how people are viewing state and central governments. Now, what's happened in these elections, and we'll get to it, there were, I think, 30 assembly by-elections across around 12 or 11 or 12 states. And there were 3 Lok Sabha by-elections in 2 states and 1 union territory. Now, as we go through each of them in detail, what we will see is that there actually wasn't much of a larger macro trend or a national level trend. And to that extent, I would say the initial hypothesis a lot of people had got nullified. But that itself, if you ask me, would mean that because if you look at it from the central government's perspective, right after the second wave of COVID, and then, you moved straight into a cycle of where the news got dominated by fuel, etc. It's good to know that there is at least no nationwide anti-incumbency. So that's something you can broadly infer. And there's a lot of local factors, and we'll go into each of them because there are a lot of state elections coming up. Lok Sabha elections in states do flow from state politics also. So each of them is crucial in its own way. So we can delve into some of these in more detail.
So we'll move on to the states, and I think the format is going to be that we're going to talk about some of the local factors influencing these elections, then the impact on the parties and the people, right, at the helm, the chief ministers of these states. All right. So as we have on the screen, we have Himachal Pradesh and Assam. Let's start with Himachal, Rohit. What is the big story here?
So Himachal was one of the 2 states that also had a Lok Sabha by-poll. So while that's not on the screen, I think most of the viewers would know that the Mandi Lok Sabha seat in Himachal was won by the Congress. So if you add it to the 3 assembly seats that also, as seen on the screen, were won by the Congress, you can say that the Congress won all 4 elections in Himachal. Now, this is quite interesting for 2 reasons. One, the BJP holds the government in Himachal. The state has assembly elections in December 2022. In the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, if there's any state you could say that was the epicenter of the Modi wave, it was Himachal Pradesh, right? I mean, the state gave the BJP almost 68 to 69% vote share. Some of the Lok Sabha seats even had above 70%. It was a literal whitewash. I think the Congress did not lead in a single assembly seat out of the 68 in Himachal. So clearly that's not the case for the case at the moment. So maybe it's worthwhile to spend a couple of minutes on what exactly happened in these seats, right? The interesting thing about Himachal, the 4 elections in Himachal, that is the Mandi Lok Sabha seat, and there were 3 assembly seats, that is Arki in Solan district, Fatehpur in Kangra, and Jubal Kotka in Shimla, all of these seats were caused due to death of incumbent legislators. Unlike some of the others where, there were other reasons why bypolls happened. And the BJP, by a variety of circumstances, managed to ensure that it didn't get the sympathy vote in any of these seats, right? That required some slightly haphazard ticket distribution. And of course, something else also happened, which I'll just come to. But there were 4 people who died. BJP held 2 of these seats. But the BJP didn't get a sympathy vote in any of these. And the Congress managed to get a sympathy vote in 3 of the 4. And that brings us to the most interesting part of this, right? One of the 3 assembly seats are key. The MLA who died there was Raja Veerbhadra Singh. Now, Veerbhadra Singh is a multiple time chief minister of Himachal Pradesh. He literally has been the Congress in Himachal since the time of Rajiv Gandhi, right? Or actually even the later days of Indira Gandhi. So he was well in his late 80s or 90s when he passed away, and he'd been an MLA, I think, from the 50s or the 60s. So clearly a towering personality. He was, interestingly, the MLA from Arki, right, in Solan district. But what's more interesting here is that Veerbhadra Singh is a Raja. He was the Maharaja of the state of Rampur, which is the largest of what is called the Shimla Hill states, right? So, and his constituency of Rampur, so he used to contest in various seats in Himachal because Rampur has been reserved for SCs for many, many years. So his actual constituency of Rampur comes under the Mandi Lok Sabha seat. And because again, Shimla, which is his home district, is also a reserved Lok Sabha seat. Mandi is where he always used to fight the Lok Sabha elections from. And in his latter days, when he was the chief minister, the Congress candidate there was his wife, Pratibha Singh. And interestingly, Mandi now went for bypolls because the BJP MP who had defeated Pratibha Singh in 2014, he also passed away. So what happened was the Congress fielded Pratibha Singh in Mandi. And interestingly, the Congress got the sympathy vote there because of the death of Veerbhadra Singh rather than the BJP, whose MP actually died creating the by-election. The BJP, and we'll see this trend through this entire series of by-elections, didn't give the ticket to any relative of the deceased MP, Mr. Ram Swarup Sharma, saying dynasty politics. It gave it to a former Kargil war hero. And that's where I think basically, like in Mandi, there was a huge sympathy vote for the Congress because the Congress candidate's husband had passed away, and he was a much more towering personality than the BJP MP who had passed away. And what the Mandi results also show is there's clearly the old divide in Himachal, right? There's this Himachal politics for long has been divided between what is called Upper Himachal, which is the hilly princely states, and Lower Himachal, which is basically the parts of the plains and parts which were in Punjab. Now, Mandi itself was a princely state, but it's never been really part of what is called Upper Himachal, right? And Upper Himachal has always been the stronghold of Veerbhadra Singh and the Congress. And Mandi Lok Sabha seat is where this whole division really comes in, because a lot of the assembly seats of Upper Shimla, like Rampur, for instance, are in the Mandi seat. So is Kinnaur and Lahore and Spiti, which is the two. I mean, a lot of listeners would know of it more for its tourism value, but again, it's very much a part of Upper Himachal. And you could see that in the results, right? I mean, I was digging through the results, and out of the 7, because Himachal has only 4 Lok Sabha seats, there's 17 assembly seats in each Lok Sabha seat, and the BJP got a lead in 8, while the Congress got a lead in 9. And all the 8 the BJP got were in Mandi district, which has, I think, 9 or 10 seats out of the 17, while in all the other seats, mainly Kullu, and which is again a hilly area, and Shimla, Lahore and Spiti, all of those places, the lead was taken by the Congress. Now, the other part of Mandi is, of course, that it's a home district of Jairam Thakur, right? Chief Minister of Himachal. And interestingly, last time there was a bypoll in Mandi, which was in 2013, Jairam Thakur had lost to Pratibha Singh, because that happened when Veerbhadra Singh became the Chief Minister of Himachal. And Jairam Thakur had lost by a huge margin. This time the margin, if you look at it, was very narrow. So what I would say is Mandi gives a lot of portents for what happens in the Lok Sabha, in the sense that what happens for next year's assembly elections. Clearly, there's no Modi wave. The BJP did miss out on having a sympathy vote. And now, while Jairam Thakur, you could say, is still popular in his home district of Mandi, but not so much in, the old Congress strongholds in Upper Himachal or even in Kullu. Now, moving on to the assembly seats, right? There were 3. And again, each one of them is very interesting in its own right. The least interesting was Arki, where Veerbhadra Singh had stood last time because he wanted to give his seat for his son. He had the confidence to go to a seat that the BJP had won twice. He won it easily, and on his death, the Congress gave it to somebody, and the new person has also won by around the same margin, which is interesting because that means that there is some amount of, like, if you look at the 3 factors there, right, there's some sympathy for Veerbhadra Singh. There is, but at the same time, the candidate is not as overpowering as Veerbhadra Singh, and there must be some small anti-incumbency against the state government. All of this together resulted in nearly the same margin that the Congress won the seat by in 2017. So you could say that there is a small amount of anti-incumbency there in Himachal, right? And that's what you'll see in both the other seats also. Fatehpur is in Kangra. Now, Fatehpur is a seat the BJP has been messing up for the last 15 years, right? Because of this individual known as Rajan Sushant, who was a BJP MLA from there. He had a huge fallout with people either in the state or the central party at some point, I think around the late 2000s. And since 2012, he's been contesting the seat as an independent. He's been losing, but he's always ensured that, he splits enough votes to ensure that the Congress wins. In 2014, interestingly, he contested for Lok Sabha on an Aam Aadmi Party ticket. So I think it's now gone beyond the point of calling him a simple BJP rebel, because, he's been rebelling for so long that he's an ex-BJP man rather than a rebel. You can see that the Congress candidate, he was a son of the deceased MLA. He did get a small swing in his favor, around 8%. Again, I think that's a mix of both sympathy and some amount of anti-incumbency that's there against the state government. But this is not a seat the BJP is going to win till it figures out its rebel problem. Last time they had 2 rebels. One rebel did even better than Rajan Sushant. They gave him the ticket this time as the BJP candidate. He lost. So clearly there is something that they're unable to solve there. The last seat is Jubal Kotkai, right? Again, this is a seat where the BJP imploded. In the sense that Jubal Kotkai again is in upper Himachal in the Shimla Hills. It was not part of Veerbhadra Singh's kingdom, but it's a different kingdom. I think either Jubal or Kotkai, the first wife of Veerbhadra Singh, was a princess from one of these 2 states, right? I don't remember it offhand. So again, it's a traditional Congress stronghold. The second Congress chief minister of Himachal was the long-time MLA from Jubal Kotkai. And it's his grandson who's now won the seat. The BJP had won it only twice, both times on account of the winner was a deceased MLA, I think he's Narinder Brakta. And his son wanted the ticket, right? For obvious reasons. The BJP refused to give it, saying dynasty politics, and gave it to some other person. And it just became a fight between the Congress and the rebel, Chetan Brakta. And the Congress won, I think, by 8 to 10% of the vote. The BJP got 4% of the vote. That's why if you see the vote share there, the BJP's vote share in Himachal is only 28%. That's because of this utter disaster that happened in Kotkai, which was entirely self-inflicted. So again, what I would say is Kotkai is a very difficult seat for the BJP to win, but it's won it the 2 times it's formed the government. The last 2 times it's won it. And technically here sympathy was with the rebel, and it wasn't like the BJP cut a lot of votes from the rebel. So the fact that the Congress has won it does show again that there's some amount of anti-incumbency here, right? I would say I'd put it at like maybe a 3 to 4% swing in favor of the Congress. And this is important because the BJP in 2017 only had a 4% lead when they won government in Himachal. So I would say that, the state is very much neck to neck as you head into 2022 December. Congress is very much alive and kicking in Himachal. I would say they're slight favorites, right, in Himachal.
That's a very comprehensive overview. All right, let's move on to Assam. And of course, when we speak about Assam, we have to talk about Mr. Himanta Biswas. So what do the numbers tell you, Rohit?
Yeah, of course. Assam is a more straightforward story, right? In the sense that it's a state that's just had elections. It's had a new chief minister who, by all accounts, seems to be very popular in his state as well as across the country. He's someone who's captured the imagination in a way few other BJP or even Congress CMs of the region past have done. So in Assam, there were 2 sets of by-elections, if you ask me. Of the 5, 3 were caused by opposition parties, MLAs resigning and joining the BJP. And 2, I think, which were both in Bodoland, were caused by the death of people who had just been elected in May. Of the 5 seats, 4 were held by the opposition and 1 was anyway held by the NDA. So just to clarify, the UPPL, that's the United People's Party Liberal, which won 2 of the 5 seats, is a NDA ally, right? It's the NDA's ally in the Bodo region, and they're part of the government in Assam. So it's basically 5 seats for the NDA here. So what's happened here in Bodoland, I mean, it was expected that the UPPL would win, and they won it very comprehensively. But the more interesting story really happened in the 2 seats in Upper Assam, where, Taura and Mariani, where long-standing Congress leaders Roopjyoti Kurmi and Sushanta Burgohain, they both resigned and joined the BJP. Well, the interesting thing about Upper Assam and Assam politics in general is, well, Assam, of course, everyone knows as a very interesting and unique communal dynamic, with I think around 60% of the population being Hindu and around 30 to 35% being Muslim. Upper Assam is almost entirely Hindu dominated, unlike Lower Assam and Barak Valley. So what the traditional Congress coalition was always to, manage to get a good number of seats from Upper Assam and then leverage it and then build upon that with getting, Muslim votes from both Lower Assam and the Barak Valley, at least over the last 20 years. Now, what's happened both the 2 times the BJP formed the government as well as in the last 2 Lok Sabha elections is Congress gotten wiped out in Upper Assam, right? It's just not able to win seats. What happened in 2021 also was, I think the Congress won only 5 seats in Upper Assam, of which 1 again was, a seat which is Muslim dominated. So there were 4 seats that the Congress won. 2 of those were the seats of the former CMs Hiteshwar Saika and Tarun Gogoi. And the other 2 MLAs who won were Roopjyoti Kurmi and Sushanta Burgohain. They both resigned. So the Congress is literally left with 2 Hindu dominant seats in Upper Assam, right? That's not a sustainable way for the Congress to ever come back to power in Assam. And what's happened also, you can see the huge others vote there, right? What's happened there is in both these seats in Upper Assam, the Congress, in one, the Congress finished a very narrow second, and the other, the Congress finished third. Both times to Akhil Gogoi's party. That is, it's called the Rajor Dal. So basically, the anti-BJP. So the vision in Assam was very simple, right? During the CAA protest, the BJP said that, all Hindus, and Himanta Biswa Sharma is very, very open about it, that all Hindus have a right to come to India. While it was opposed on 2 aspects. One is the NRC part where, the Bengali-speaking Muslims, they are not illegal immigrants and they have a right to be in India. Well, Assamese nationalists said that, whether you're a Muslim or a Hindu, if you're not an Assamese, you shouldn't be allowed to be, migrating to Assam. So that was the crux of this debate. That's what the whole anti-CAA protests in Assam were about. So the Congress clearly went on that angle in Assam. It tried to in 2019, 2021. Akhil Gogoi and other parties also went on that angle, and clearly now the purely Assamese ethno-nationalist vote seems to have, which is increasingly anti-BJP because the BJP doesn't believe in that, has now moved out of the Congress's hands, and that's going to lead to a lot of split outcomes. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Congress actually manages to create its unwieldy coalition together, right? Because it was actually trying to hold on to Assamese nationalists and Bengali-speaking Muslims in the same go. That's how the whole AIUDF alliance also happened, which has, I think, hurt its credibility irredeemably among Assamese ethno-nationalists. So I think the BJP, for now at least, is in a very sweet spot in Assam.
No, so that was my question, actually. Going to be my question, that with the others being such a huge percentage, right, is there an opportunity for the Congress to knit together, an opposition against the BJP?
What's happened here is when you look at the others, because I think 3 of the 5 by-elections were in what is called Bodoland. There are a lot of other parties that independents, etc., who stood there. So they are a good part of the others. But if you leave aside that, in Upper Assam, yes, there were strong independents, or the Rajor Dal, it's not a registered party, so they come as independents on the. That's why this map is slightly misleading. So The problem the Congress faces is that it needs to get together people who are opposed to both the NRC and the CAA. So the BJP is very clear on Himanta Biswa is very clear on what he stands for, right? He believes that non-Assamese Hindu migrants who move to Assam should be welcomed in Assam, while he says that non-Hindu migrants who moved illegally to Assam, they have to be sent back to Bangladesh. Now, two groups of people have a problem with that. One is obviously Bengali-speaking Muslims. They are saying that that's not acceptable. The other, that they should be kept inside. And of course, these kind of terms of actual deportation, etc., I think are not really something that one can look at as how it's going to practically pan out. But that's their view, and the Assamese ethno-nationalist view is that both sets of Bengali-speaking migrants need to be pushed back out of Assam. So when the BJP has a clear view, and clearly it has around 35 to 40% support, right, in Assam, it's very difficult for the Congress to... The BJP is actually the centrist view here, in one way. I mean, I wouldn't say centrist. It's obviously a very clearly Hindu nationalistic view. But it's the center of these three views. And the Congress has to knit together the two extremes here, and that's going to be difficult.
Yeah, so they've taken a very ideological stance on this, right? So even at the risk of antagonizing some of the sections of the society. So yeah, but what you're saying is that this split that we see on the screen does not reflect the larger demographics or the larger, how it will play out in all of Assam, basically.
That's correct, because in most of these seats, it's a individual fight, right? In the sense that, while these others are 43%, it's not that in all the seats, you have different people getting 18, 20, 10, and that's adding to 43. It's just that different people are, and because none of them are from registered parties, in this pie chart, they come like...
All right, moving on. Another interesting state, West Bengal. And here what is again interesting is, I think AITC has 75% vote share, right? And BJP at about 14.5 and CPI-M at 7.28, right? Anything else that sticks out to you, when you look at this, Rohit?
This is quite interesting, right? In the sense that West Bengal actually, as I mentioned, had two by-elections, I think, a few weeks back, where it was not this lopsided. It was, of course, the TMC won comfortably. They had about more than 50% of the vote in both those seats. But the BJP was a clear second, and, it wasn't this. I mean, these are Assad-esque margins, right? Like, these are the kind of margins that you see in Syria and Kazakhstan and those kind of places. So, I mean, I'm not casting any aspersions on the credibility of the process here, but these kind of margins definitely didn't exist in, in May, and they didn't exist in the bypolls that happened a couple of weeks back, right? So this is, if you ask me again, obviously the margin distorts things and it's very difficult to understand what exactly happened because it's clearly not a normal by-election, but this is bad for the BJP, right? I mean, it's really bad. And it's actually worse than what it's seen on the screen. And again, I'm leaving the process part of this aside. Whatever happened in the process and how elections were conducted, leaving that aside just based on the results. It's clear that, while the CPM is at 7%, they actually contested only 2 seats. They're given 2 seats to the AIFB and the RSP. And obviously, those are really small parties. They're practically non-existent. The CPM in the 2 seats it contested against the BJP, it was very close to the BJP, right? And this is really bad for the BJP, especially because one of those seats was a sitting seat of the BJP. Like that seat in Shantipur there was a bypoll because the person who won from the BJP in May, he was a Lok Sabha MP and he wanted to retain his seat. And that's in the Matua heartland, in the Rana Ghat Lok Sabha seat in Nadia. So this is really bad news for the BJP that's no longer a clear second. Forget fighting with the Trinamool to win the state. It seems to be fighting with the CPM for second. Interestingly, the CPM stood in both Nadia and I think the seat in North 24 Parganas, which are both places where the BJP had before 2019 struggled a bit. So clearly the CPM is, I wouldn't say CPM is alive and kicking, but the BJP is down to the level of the CPM, and that's a serious concern for the BJP, right? It has 18 MPs from Bengal, and 17 now that Babul Supriyo is no longer there. But that's the real story here. Forget what the Trinamool did or didn't do, but it seems that the CPM is back in Bengal. And interesting thing is, one of the seats, the bypoll happened because Nishit Pramanik, who's MOS for Home in the central government, he vacated his assembly seat, and the BJP did really badly there also, right? When I say about Assad-esque margins and whatever, if such things are, happening in the assembly seat of the MOS of Home Affairs, then that's clearly, that's not good news for the BJP. Right?
Yeah, very lopsided. Moving on, I think it seems more of an even split, although, it's just, we're talking about only 1 seat, right? It seems more of an even split in Telangana between Bharatiya Janata Party and TRS, right?
Telangana, again, let me just give you context what happened here. So this was the Huzurabad bypoll, where Mr. Itala Rajender, who was literally the number 2 in the TRS government from 2014 to 19, right? I think he was ex-health minister. I think he's even been the finance minister at some point. I'm not very sure. He was a very, very senior leader of the TRS. He's been involved with it since the founding of the party. So he got pushed out by KCR on some putative land grabbing charges sometime around the beginning of this year, and he resigned and he joined the BJP. So he's won the seat for the BJP. So while there's been an election, the MLA hasn't changed. This is a very significant result, right? Because Huzurabad is in Karimnagar, which used to be the heartland of TRS politics, right? I mean, and interestingly, in 2019, the BJP won Karimnagar Lok Sabha seat. The BJP's it's also been a seat where the BJP has traditionally had a presence. It's won it twice in a Lok Sabha election, Karimnagar. It was won in 98 by Vidyasagar Rao and now by Bandi Sanjay Kumar, who's now the state BJP president and the literal face of the BJP in Telangana today. Now, Karimnagar has been a TRS stronghold. You know, what we saw in 2019 was a moving away of OBCs who were the backbone of the TRS in Telangana. Before that, the TDP, from the TRS to the BJP, right? Bandi Sanjay is a OBC leader. Mr. Rajender is himself an OBC leader. And, you know, the only assembly seat in Karimnagar which gave the TRS a good lead in 2019 was Huzurabad because of Mr. Rajender. So from 2019, what's happened in Telangana is the emergence of BJP as an alternative to KCR. Like, it won 4 Lok Sabha seats, 3 of which no one really expected, at least at a national level before the elections. People in Telangana may have had different opinions. And after that, there was a Dubaka bypoll where, the BJP won a seat in KCR's heartland of Meda. After that, there was a GHMC polls where, again, which we did a podcast on, where the BJP ran the TRS very close. There was general movement of emergence of BJP as an opposition to KCR. There was a Nagarjuna Sagar bypoll in Nalgonda where, the BJP did really badly. It was a traditional Congress TRS fight that happened early this year. But what this result shows, and then the Congress made a lot of moves by getting Revant Reddy, right, to be the state Congress president. So basically what's happened here is a fight between the BJP and the Congress to be the number 2 party in Telangana, because there is anger against KCR, but the fight is for who will get that. And it's clear that at least in the North Telangana districts, that's why, so a lot of people on Twitter said, we should disregard this result when you count the BJP because this was Mr. Rajender's victory. I sort of disagree with that because Rajender joined the BJP because he knew the BJP would be able to give him this victory. The BJP has a presence in Karimnagar, has a presence throughout North Telangana. OBCs are moving towards the BJP in large numbers. And obviously, I mean, if it wasn't Rajender, BJP wouldn't have won. I'm not denying that. But I don't think Rajender also would have won if he was not in the BJP. Where that synthesis has happened, at least in North Telangana. Now, when we wait for elections in 2023, it's all up in the air now, right? Because the BJP should really expect to do well in North Telangana. The question really is, how well will it be able to do in South Telangana, which, at least as per the last bypoll in Nagarjuna Sagar, they're nowhere near the pick. So that's what I would say. Again, one more thing about this is KCR has been planning to resign and make his son the chief minister for a long time. And there was Mr. KTR. There was a lot of rumors that, if TR has won this election, that handover would happen. So clearly that's not the case. KCR after that has come out. He's been doing agitations. He's been attacking the central government, attacking the BJP. Clearly, he knows that he has competition and he needs to get his house in order first before getting into succession planning.
All right. We have Haryana next, where BJP has won about 39%, INC at 13.78%, INLD or the Indian National Lokdal at 43.49%. Rohit, what do you make of Haryana?
Haryana was again a big election, right? Because it was an election fought on the farm laws, like the farm laws that have been the topic in the country for over a year now. So this is the Allahabad seat in Haryana. The bypoll happened there because the Indian National Lokdal's only MLA Abhay Singh Chautala, the son of Om Prakash Chautala and the grandson of Devi Lal, he resigned in support of the farmers, right? And he contested again. So idea behind that was grandstanding for 2 reasons. If you look at the results in Haryana since 2019, the INLD has been wiped out, right? Abhay Singh Chautala is the only MLA of the INLD. That's happened due to the family feud in the Chautala family between Abhay and Om Prakash Chautala on one hand, and Om Prakash Chautala's elder son Ajay and his son Dushyant Chautala, who's the Deputy Chief Minister of Haryana, on the other. So Dushyant, again, a lot of listeners might be aware that both Om Prakash Chautala and Ajay Singh Chautala were in jail for a long time since 2014 because of a teacher recruitment scam. So the party was effectively being run by Abhay and Dushyant Chautala, and there was a conflict, right? I mean, between them, which led to Dushyant with Ajay's backing, creating a new party called the JJP, the Jan Nayak Janata Party. And the JJP wiped out the INLD, right? In the old INLD strongholds in 2019. The INLD could only win this one seat because that's the old family seat of the Chautalas, where Devi Lal has won, Om Prakash Chautala has won, Abhay Chautala got that legacy. So the JJP has been facing issues during this farm laws because the farm laws, I mean, and this result of course shows it, but the farm laws in Haryana have largely been a protest by Jats, and the INLD and the JJP are a party of Jats. I mean, it's been a party that is backed by Jats. The leadership is Jat, and they fight for Jat. They've traditionally been known to fight for Jat, Hindu Jat interests, right? I mean, primarily because Haryana doesn't have a lot of Sikh Jat. So what's happened here is that the JJP was severely compromised by being in the NDA alliance for two reasons. One, the BJP in Haryana is a party of the non-Jat. So it was to that extent already seen as a sort of, betrayal in a very polarized polity. And the other issue was, of course, the farm laws. So the JJP obviously had its limitations in opposing the farm laws because it was in the government. They also couldn't leave the government. So they had been stuck, and this was basically a gambit by the INLD and Abhay Singh Chautala to regain political relevance. Right? If you look at the results, it's a 4% margin. The last time, I think it was a 10% win. The BJP was on 29% and the Chautalas, the INLD was on 39%. The JJP, I think, was on 4% and Congress was at 20%. Congress also has been very vocal, of course, as we all know, against the farm laws. So clearly, this was a disaster for the INLD. I mean, it didn't regain its political relevance. It just about kept its single MLA. What this means is that clearly Haryana is polarized, right? Between Jats and Jat Sikhs on one side and non-Jats on the other. Non-Jats, by and large, have backed the BJP 39%. This, again, Allahabad is a seat where Jats comprise around 38 to 39%. Sikhs, who are, of course, even more vehement in their opposition to the farm laws, comprise another 6 to 7%. So around 45 to 46% of the population in Allahabad is of Jats or Sikh. And even in that seat, the BJP has managed to give a huge fight, right? And it also points to this whole thing that a lot of people have been writing about, especially Arihant and Swaraj, where, he says that clearly a lot of non-Jat communities are not doing anything against these protests just to maintain social harmony. Right? Like these protests have paralyzed normal life in Haryana for over a year now in large parts of Haryana. It's clearly driven by Jats, and other communities are, by and large, staying quiet just to maintain social harmony. It doesn't mean that, Haryana is overwhelmingly in favor of fighting against the laws or something like that. And that's probably... you can see that in the way the BJP in Haryana has been talking after the results, right? Like till the elections happened, the BJP was very quiet. They were not really doing anything to lots of provocations. BJP leaders were being blockaded daily. They were not able to campaign. And now, you can see all sorts of statements being made by various BJP leaders against the protesters. There's a general assertion among the BJP in Haryana against the protests. I think that's basically this thing of this result, right? Like the farm laws, clearly the protest against it is restricted to a couple of communities. That's a huge boost to the central government also, of course, not just the BJP government in Haryana.
All right, moving on to Madhya Pradesh. And here in the three seats, the BJP won 2 and the Congress won 1. And if you look at the vote share, I mean, I think it seems an even split almost, right? BJP at 47.58% and the Indian National Congress at 45.4%. Rohit, what is the Madhya Pradesh story?
Madhya Pradesh again had a Lok Sabha by-election where in Khandwa, where the BJP held the seat by a reduced margin, but which was only to be expected considering 2019's Modi way. But I mean, MP was a state where nothing much happened, right, in these by-elections. Interestingly, of the 3 seats, the BJP held 1 before the election and the Congress held 2. BJP took both those seats from the Congress and lost its sitting seat to the Congress back. So it's more about local ticket distribution, things like that. So nothing, I wouldn't say you can really draw much from it, except that there's no real anti-incumbency against the BJP government. Again, there were ticket issues in all parties. The BJP in its sitting seat again didn't give ticket to the family of the deceased MLA. While I think there were multiple aspirants from that family and only one stood and he didn't get votes. There was a lot of chaos around it, which probably did hurt the BJP there. In the other 2 seats, there were chaos, some amount of chaos in the Congress. In one seat, Prithvipur, where I think the BJP had finished 4th in the assembly elections, they got the second placed candidate from Samajwadi Party to join them. He won the seat duly. So, I mean, I don't think there's any larger story in MP. It's more about how local equations matter. And, I could say there's no real large-scale anti-incumbency against both.
Okay, let's speak about Rajasthan. And here, it seems, the Indian National Congress won both the seats, right? With the BJP getting about 18.8%, the Indian National Congress getting 37.5%, CPI, ML getting about insignificant around 0.3% and so on. So what is the story here?
There were two seats here and there was a clear problem again with BJP ticket selection. In one of the seats, the BJP actually finished fourth, and the other seat, the BJP finished third. And the seat where the BJP finished fourth, both the second and the third place candidates were BJP rebels. So clearly there's been massive issues in ticket selection in the BJP in Rajasthan. And there's a lot of factionalism, right? Everyone knows about Vasundhara Raje being on a separate plane from the state BJP leadership to an extent from the central BJP leadership. One of her candidates finished third here. There was another rebel who finished second. So the BJP, I mean, if you look at it, the Congress, an incumbent party, didn't get more than 40% of the vote in either state. I mean, either seat. Clearly, it's not a very, very popular government, but the BJP really needs to get its act together. In Dhariyawad, which was a BJP sitting seat, again, the BJP didn't give its sitting MLA's, the deceased MLA's family the ticket. The BJP finished third to a Bharatiya Tribal Party rebel. So that's a very interesting thing because the Bharatiya Tribal Party is a Gujarat-based party which has been making inroads in Rajasthan. They have two MLAs in Rajasthan. There's a tribal belt in Rajasthan in the extreme south, right, near Gujarat. Basically rural Udaipur, Banswara and Dungarpur. Dhariyawad is in rural Udaipur, and the BTP by and large had been restricted to Dungarpur and Banswara, which are more tribal, right? But here it looks like they've managed to break out even in Udaipur and clearly, so what's happened here again was some sort of rebellion inside the BTP. So there was an independent young candidate who stood on the platform of tribal rights. He finished second. Clearly, he's taken a lot more votes from the BJP than the Congress. That's again something the BJP needs to worry about. But in the long term, the BTP's growth is very dangerous for the Congress because it's a party of tribal, speaks for tribal assertion. Obviously, here it was a rebel, but if you could consider it as a larger part of the larger tribal assertion movement, the Congress will be in trouble because most people who vote for tribal assertion, whether in MP, Chhattisgarh or even Gujarat or Rajasthan, like I'm not saying tribals vote for the Congress, the BJP and the Congress are roughly equal among tribals, but tribal identity politics has long supported the Congress, and if the BTP starts breaking through, it will really hurt.
All right, moving on to Bihar, and here there were a couple of seats, both of them won by the Janata Dal United. The vote split seems to be JDU 46.22%, the Indian National Congress at 3%, the RJD at 40.72%, and we have a bunch of other parties. Interestingly, the LJP also at about 3.6%. What is the significance of these numbers?
Actually, interesting election, right? Because both these seats had JDU MLAs who passed away, and the government, the NDA government in Bihar doesn't have much of a majority. It sneaked through in the last elections. Then the LJP had a very public breakup with the NDA, or rather you could say Chirag Paswan had a very public breakup with the NDA, while the rest of the parties stayed. There was a general expectation that the party's support base and voters were mostly and cadre were with Chirag, who had left. The RJD, on the other hand, the Congress had tried to reinvent itself by getting Kanhaiya Kumar on board. The JDU government hasn't been very popular. It's faced a lot of issues even in the last 1 year. The RJD has been aggressive. The RJD then tried to dump the Congress. I think both these seats, or at least one of these seats, had a Congress candidate in 2020. But the RJD refused to give that seat to the Congress. So there was a general expectation that the RJD would at least, so Congress stood in both seats independently. There was a general expectation that the RJD would win at least one seat, and that is Tarapur. And interestingly, the RJD has flopped in both. The JDU has come out much stronger than expected. So this is really a big boost for Nitish Kumar. It's a big bit of a letdown for the RJD, both Tejasvi and Lalu Prasad. And in Tarapur, I think the Congress's votes were almost equal to the winning margin, right? I mean, of course, we can't expect 100% transferability, but clearly the Congress also has proved a small sort of point to the RJD that it's not like it can at least spoil things for the RJD even if it can't win on its own. And that's the problem, right? I mean, the RJD and the Congress have been allied together for over 20 years now. Like except for this 2009, 2010 two elections, they've been allied since 1999. They've consistently failed, right? It's an alliance that is unable to break out of its own ceiling. At the same time, they're understanding that if they fight separately, the floor will collapse beneath them. And that's a long-term call both the parties need to make, right? I mean, I guess the Congress is showing its intent by getting people like Kanhaiya Kumar, who's known to be on bad terms with the RJD in. But that's something the Congress will need to stick to, because, and that will of course help the BJP and the NDA in the short term, right? If the RJD and the Congress contest independently in 2024, it's not going to help either of them. But in the long run, they will have to go through this trouble to, or rather these disappointing results, to create that separate identity, and only then can they really challenge the NDA, which, in spite of all its weaknesses and unpopularity, still has a very solid social base in Bihar.
So, on a related note, what do you make of Congress's, moves to sort of co-opt, Kanhaiya Kumar, Jignesh Mevani, and the rest of them to appeal to the youth, perhaps, and also to bolster Rahul Gandhi's, image among the masses?
I mean, it ties in with what we've been saying on so many podcasts now, right? The Congress, or at least Rahul Gandhi, is very clearly ideological. And Kanhaiya Kumar is not just a youth leader; he's a far left youth leader, right? And same is the case with Jignesh Mevani. Kanhaiya Kumar, at least you could say from a caste perspective or something, he can channel upper caste disaffection with Nitish Kumar in Bihar, right? But is that really the priority of the Congress at this point? I don't know. I mean, because he opens up a lot of other attacks, and if you could see what happened yesterday with Salman Khurshid, then Rahul Gandhi. So clearly the Congress has a problem in appealing to middle India, right? And I don't know if Kanhaiya Kumar is the answer to that, or forget being the answer, he actually worsens the problem. The bigger issue, and in Mevani's case, I mean, Congress, he's an MLA, right? Because the Congress gave him a very safe seat. Like, it's a seat the Congress even leads in during Modi wave Lok Sabha elections. But he wanted to contest as an independent. The Congress allowed him to do that. He won. Like, the Dalit vote in Gujarat and Dalit vote in many parts of India is solidly with the Congress. So I'm not sure what, again, is it that the Congress hopes to gain electorally by adding either of them. But it just seems to be more of a doubling down on their far left tendencies, right? And let's see how that plays out. I don't think it will play out very well in the near to medium term for the Congress, as we've discussed before. But clearly that's an ideological path they are firm on, and it's up to them.
Right. Moving on to our home state, or at least my home state of Karnataka. And here we had an even split. So the Bharatiya Janata Party won one seat while the Indian National Congress won another. Even the vote share, I think BJP at 51.86%. The INC at 44.76%, with JDS at 1.57, and the others making up the remaining, votes. So Rohit, over to you.
2-3 things here, right? So just to give perspective, starting with the results, the BJP gained a seat from the JDS, while the Congress gained a seat from the BJP. In the other part of it is that the JDS seat, which was gained by the BJP, the deceased JDS MLA's son was the Congress candidate. So you could, and that was in Sindhgi, right? I mean, Sindhgi is in Vijaypura district. There's no real JDS there. The candidate who used to win the ex-MLA, he was winning on his own strength. So basically, you could say for practical terms, the BJP gained a seat and lost one, while the Congress gained a seat, and I mean, I could say even lost one, because now Sindhgi, that's going to be the fight in future, right? It's going to be a BJP-Congress fight. The JDS is irrelevant. So what happened? Let's start with the Congress gain, right? The Congress gain in Hangal was, if you ask me, expected. Hangal is a seat of a very, very senior BJP leader, CM Udasi, who's very close to B.S. Yediyurappa, who died recently. He was the number 2 in the KJP when the KJP was formed. He had by and large won the seat whenever the Congress didn't win at the state level, right? Hangal is actually a bellwether seat. Since 1983, Udasi had won the seat whenever a non-Congress government had been formed in Karnataka or was the largest party. He had won on Janata Dal, JDU, BJP tickets, while not JDU, Janata Dal and BJP tickets, while Congress always used to win the seat when there was a Congress government in Karnataka, in 1989, 1999, 2013. So all of those 3 elections, the Congress had won. Now, what I noticed, in Hangal has a very huge Muslim population, right, by Karnataka standards. So what I noticed, at least in the last election, when the BJP, it's in Haveri district, the BJP swept Haveri and most of central Karnataka because of the pro-Yediyurappa sentiment. Udasi had a very narrow margin, right? I mean, it wasn't much of a margin. Something similar happened in the Lok Sabha. Again, Haveri, the BJP had a huge lead. But in Hangal, there was not much of a lead. There was a lead, but it wasn't great. And if you ask me, I was always expecting this to happen whenever Udasi moved on, right? That's what's happened. Like, Congress won the seat by a healthy margin. And if you ask me, it's a seat that's going to by and large stick with the Congress in the future. This is bad news for the CM Basavaraj Bommai, because his constituency is right next to Hangal. He had made it a prestige fight, rather ill-advisedly in my opinion, because it was always going to be a uphill battle and he lost. The other seats, Sindhgi, I mean, Karnataka by-elections are not necessarily the best guides, right? right? Because governing parties have a huge advantage. Sindhi, the BJP gained it by a huge margin, right? I mean, no one expected the BJP to be at over 58%. That's like Lok Sabha election results in Sindhi. And I mean, how much of it was ruling party advantage? We don't know. So I would say that, these elections don't really mean much, or I would say at best, says that the Congress has a small swing in its favor going into 2023, but a lot will depend on candidate selection. And the JDS in both these places, which have reasonably significant Muslim population, fielded a Muslim candidate to try and split Congress votes, right? I mean, it was a very transparent tactic and it obviously failed. They got humiliated. So, I mean, you can be sure that the Muslim vote in Karnataka is very solidly with.
All right, and finally we're on to Maharashtra, where the Indian National Congress won one seat. Here the vote share seems to be clearly in favor of them. The Congress at 57.03%, BJP coming in second at 35.06%, and the rest of the parties making up the remaining vote share. So, Rohit, what do you make of Maharashtra?
Maharashtra, you can interpret it in two ways, right? You can look at it a pro-Congress result, or you can look at a pro-BJP result. Now, to give some background on the seat is Deglur. It's in Nanded district. It's been a traditional Congress-Shiv Sena fight here, right? Since competitive two-party politics came to Maharashtra. The by-election was caused because the sitting Congress MLA died. The Congress gave the ticket to his son. The BJP gave the ticket to the ex-Shiv Sena MLA, right, who had won in 2014 and he had finished second in 2019 on an NDA ticket. I mean, as an NDA candidate. Now, if you look at the 2019 results, the Congress had 50% of the vote, the NDA had 38%. And NDA here means BJP plus Shiv Sena, of course, in 2019. And if you look at the BJP's vote in 2014 when it contested independently, it was just 14%. So what you can basically see here is it shows, because the Congress did really well, right? I mean, it was a prestige battle for Ashok Chavan, the tallest Congress leader in Maharashtra and ex-CM, and he delivered, right? They won the seat. But if you look at it from the perspective of the MVA, this was a seat that was Congress versus Sena. The BJP didn't exist, and that's what's going to be the future, right? Now, what was 2 versus 2 has become 3 versus 1. What is the additive that the one that is switched is going to give is what is going to define the success of the MVA in future elections. And from that perspective, this was not a great result for the MVA, right? Because the BJP has no presence here. It got only 14% vote the only time it contested. It poached the Shiv Sena candidate, and that's going to happen across Maharashtra, right? I mean, ex-Shiv Sena candidates aren't going to give up their political careers just because of the MVA. They're going to move to the BJP wherever they see value, and the BJP sees value in inducting them. That guy moved and he just lost 3% votes, right? I mean, in a seat like this, there's a sympathy where there's massive ruling party advantage. If you're losing only 2 to 3% of votes, it basically means the BJP is inheriting the bulk of the NDA's votes of 2019. That's not really good news for the MVA.
All right.
It's not going to be as easy as they probably would want it to be.
So, Rohit, these were the states that we wanted to cover, but any other polls that were important that we should know about?
There were some elections in the north. There was one other Lok Sabha election, right, which was in Dadra and Nagar Haveli, where the independent MP had died in mysterious circumstances. The Shiv Sena had tried to he had written a suicide note where he blamed a lot of people, including the administrator of the Union Territory of Dadra and Nagar Haveli. Who's of course an ex-BJP leader. The Shiv Sena had tried to insinuate that this was not hunky-dory. And what the Shiv Sena did was they fielded his wife as the Shiv Sena candidate. So it was a big day for the Shiv Sena that it got an MP outside Maharashtra. She won, obviously. I mean, given the circumstances, the sympathy wave, etc. She won. The BJP also messed up on its tickets, gave it to somebody who was not the previous MP, and there was some internal dissension there. But she won by a very big margin of more than 20%. The Shiv Sena candidate who was the ex-MP's wife. But I think that's an expected win, and it gives the Shiv Sena bragging rights that it now has an MP outside Maharashtra. But beyond that, I don't think it has any significance. There were some elections in Meghalaya, Mizoram, and there was an uncontested election in Nagaland. Meghalaya and Mizoram, I think the ruling parties seem to have won both against the Congress, which is again to be expected, considering the ruling party advantage. So I don't think there's anything significant from those. I think we've covered all the significant ones.
All right. Just to summarize, Rohit, right? If you were to pick the biggest winners and the biggest losers from these rounds of elections, right? What would your top 3 in each category be?
I think biggest winners, I would say Himanta Biswa is the obvious one. Another one is Mamta Banerjee. The third one is, I would give it a tie between, third is Nitish Kumar. I'll also give an honorary mention for the way certain BJP units like Telangana, Haryana, etc. who have done really well. Biggest losers, I think the Indian National Lok Dal. They've totally failed in their stated objective of reinventing themselves. Jairam Thakur, the BJP CM of Himachal, had a very bad. So did, to some extent, Mr. Basuraj Bommai, though I wouldn't be too harsh on. I mean, it was by and large a status quo day, right? I guess maybe the CMs of Assam and Bengal should be very happy and the CM of Himachal should be very sad. Ashok Gehlot had an okay day, I would think. But yeah.
Right. So we have a bunch of, assembly elections coming up, next year, right? And in some sense, these by-elections, as you mentioned earlier, is a bit of a temp check ahead of those elections, right? And also leading up to 2024, post-COVID and post everything that's happened over the last 18 months or so. What are some key trends that you see as a result of these by-elections?
Couple of trends, right? And they're both good news to both the BJP and the Congress, right? For the Congress, the thing is that a lot of people have been saying, the Congress is imploding, the Congress is in trouble, etc., etc. And yes, the Congress is imploding in a few states like Assam or to an extent in Telangana, but it's able to very much hold the line in bilateral fights, right? Himachal was a very good result. Rajasthan was a decent result. Madhya Pradesh was a very good result. So the Congress is not bottom. It's not like imploding in states where it's in direct fight with the BJP. So that means it's very much in survival mode. For the BJP, the key thing is there's no large-scale anti-incumbency against central government. It's people are still positive to neutral about it, which is the Prime Minister has been the BJP's biggest asset for years now, and he's still going strong, and that's a big thing. The bad thing is the BJP's model of ticket selection has gone horribly wrong. It's imploded in all sorts of, except in places where it was clear who the candidate should be. Wherever they've tried to experiment, try to go by some other logic, they've messed up. They've messed up places. They've messed up Rajasthan completely. I would say that's not just ticket selections, factionalism. They were all over the place in ticket selection in Himachal. Even in MP, the seat they lost, they didn't do the best job. I would say even in Hangal, in Karnataka, they might have done better if they'd fielded a relative of Mr. Udasi. So the BJP's ticket selection, they need to really get it right, because I don't think they can be confident that macro trends will override results, override local factors in assembly elections, right? It's been an issue for a while now in the BJP, at least since I've been tracking them since the last UP elections. Assembly election tickets have been bad, right? They've caused majority government in Haryana. Alliance issues cost governments in Maharashtra and Jharkhand. MP 2018 wasn't great. Ticket selection. Karnataka 2018 wasn't. Bengal 2021 was not good. So BJP really needs to up its game on ticket selection, and they really matter in assembly. Lok Sabha, it's fine.
Yeah, so that's a comprehensive overview of all of the by-election polls, right, and trends arising from that. So thank you again, Rohit, for joining us. This was again, as usual, a very fascinating podcast on all of the perspectives on the polls. Thanks for joining, and look forward to seeing you on another podcast very soon.
Thanks, Gary. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharat Varta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.